Hello, and welcome to the Rosewood Institute webinar series, Working with Complex Clients in Treating Eating Disorders and Trauma. My name is Nancy Berry. I am the Marketing Manager at the Rosewood Centers for Eating Disorders. Joining me in the studio today is Michael Klinkner, who serves as the Clinical Director at Rosewood Ranch Outpatient Treatment Program in Tempe, Arizona. Michael earned his Master of Social Work from West Virginia University in 1999 and received his independent licensure in 2004. He has worked in a variety of settings and has provided individual, group, and family therapy to a diverse clientele. Michael is trained in MET CBT-5, dialectical behavioral therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and is certified in EMDR. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Today we're going to be focusing on working with complex clients in the treatment of eating disorders and then trauma. As many of us know, in working with eating disorders, trauma is so often present. We're going to go through how we define exactly what trauma is, and then several different ways that we can look at not only conceptualization of the problem, but then how to directly attack that and give you a few take-home things that you can begin implementing to work with these difficult clientele. Here's what we're going to go through. The first thing is understanding the basic obstacles. We're going to be looking at the AIP model. The AIP model is the underpinning the theory behind EMDR, and then we'll look at how that applies to not only for eating disorders but trauma. We're going to look at attachment styles and what that means for our complex clients. We're going to look at treatment planning to target the most pertinent issues, and then we're going to look at our own stuff, and that's things around burnout or vicarious traumatization, things like that. First off, let's take on understanding the obstacles. So here's what we know about complex cases. They require us to look at them really very differently, especially when they involve trauma. These are cases that are really very difficult. These are the ones that keep you up at night, the ones that you just can't figure out, the ones that you staff with your supervisors and friends, the ones that have you searching through all different kind of blogs and throughout the internet to try to put these things together. And especially when there's trauma involved, what that means is lots of times about what that looks like and where things can get stuck is really so often difficult, and you don't always see coming. Trauma can affect clients in really unpredictable ways, including how they relate to us, transference, potentially even own counter-transference. Complex cases are often the most frustrating and require the most energy and effort from us. Inevitably, as you probably know, from there become things like cynicism, pessimism, and then our own negativity can set in, and that's from us because they're complex and they're hard and they're frustrating. We can't figure it out even though we try to, and lots of times you'll hear things like, we end up working harder than the clients, and that can be really tough when you really are hoping to help someone make it and they're not getting the success that they want. Sometimes that's really hard on us. And then looking at the underlying issues and addressing those is often the answer. We found so much, and the research points very clearly to whenever there is looping or stuckness or problems that are going on and someone just tends to keep doing the same kind of behaviors over and over again, we need to look at what the underlying issues are. We may be able to put great Band-Aids on the superficial wounds, but when we don't look at what's causing the problems, don't looking at the underlying issues, that's where we can get stuck. And so when we can address the underlying issues and then a lot of the associated belief systems, we find lots of times that clients can move really very quickly. The adaptive information processing model. So this is the AIP model. And this is the underpinnings of EMDR treatment, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I find looking at this using the AIP model is so very helpful, especially in the most complex clients, because it allows you to see about what the symptomology is right now and what's going on, and then looking below it too about how it's currently showing up. The chart that you're looking at right now walks from left to right, and it'll be looking at the past and then the future trauma memories and negative events, the present symptoms and the triggers that come up, and then what we're hoping for in the future as far as the appropriate and adaptive responses in the presence of those triggers. So let's look at the first part on the left. So those are those maybe past trauma memories, things that have come up. So that is things like a loss of a father or sexual abuse. And those are big, huge things that are easily identified as traumas. Lots of times in discussing traumas, you can hear the term big T traumas, which are the catastrophic type things, which is like sexual abuse or someone important to you dying, or it could be physical abuse, something like that, something that is big and impacts you in an acute way. There's also things that get called small T's. And small T's, not to say that they're small or that they're not a big deal, but these are the smaller instances, things like being bullied at school or role reversal parenting and disrupted communication that add up over time. One in and of itself isn't inherently something that may drastically affect how you look at the world. But when you add in a few years of them, or 10 to 15 examples of them, or lots of those things, they can add up to really, really big effects on a person, a client, or any of us throughout time. Let me explain what role reversal parenting is too. So role reversal parenting is whenever a kid takes on that parenting role. And so it may be that they're parenting their siblings. It may be that they're parenting like some cousins or someone else in the house. It also lots of times it was whenever the child ends up parenting the parent. So in the absence of a parent who's doing the parenting things that they should be doing, someone has to pick up that slack. Someone needs to take that role. That's when lots of times we'll see a kid that'll pick that up. Sometimes it's the oldest client, maybe not. Lots of times it's within the family systems, the hero role or someone who decides they need to take it on and save everybody from there. And so you'll see the loss of father, sexual abuse, bullied at school, role reversal parenting, disrupted communication. The big T's or the small T's add up to what we'll see as far as the present symptoms. Those are the eating disorder behaviors. Those are self-harm. Those are drug abuse. Those are sexually acting out. That is any number of things that we see from our client, which are dysfunctional, maladaptive responses. But quite honestly, they're the best they could figure out at the time. They're doing the best they can given the resources they have. Eating disorder behaviors or self-harm or drugs or sexually acting out in the moment will make you feel better, will make you feel more in control, will make you feel like you're solving the problem. Long term, they're a terrible idea and have horrible effects, but in the moment, they're acting out as functionally as they think they can in those moments. And so that's how they're solving those problems, those past trauma memories that are listed on the left, and they'll manifest in that symptomology. What can happen from there is then we'll get those the triggers that'll bring things up, and that'll be things like name calling, or hear the word no, or feeling bored, or just about anything along the way. And this is really client specific stuff. That is, the way I interpret someone name calling me is very different than when someone else gets name called, or hearing the word no, or feeling bored, or feeling lonely, or sadness, or whatever it is. We get triggered into those things. Those things come up that are linked to those what has happened, those negative events, which are linked to the way they were adapted through the eating disorder behaviors, self-harm, drug abuse, sexually acting out, whatever. Ideally, what we want to get to is the appropriate and adaptive responses in the presence of those triggers. So if you look at it backwards, if you will, on the right is where we're trying to get them to. What is in our face? And lots of times what is most in front of us are those eating disorder behaviors, self-harm, sexually acting out, that are brought about by the name calling and hearing the word no and feeling bored, things like that. And so that's what's in our face all the time. That's what we're having to deal with. That lots of times are the fires we're constantly having to put out with our complex clients. Working on the underlying issues means that we're looking at those things that are on the left as far as loss of father, sexual abuse, bullied at school, role reversal parenting, things like that. And so what we're going to walk through and what the adaptive information processing says that we need to look at are those things, because if not, we can get lots of stuff under control. We can get the eating disorder behaviors to abate. We can get the self-harm to abate. We can get abstinence from drug abuse. But if we don't look at those original past traumas or the big T's and the little t's, inevitably it's going to come out in a different dysfunctional way. And so while someone may be a self-harmer right now, and we can teach them how to abate that. We can put in some great coping skills in place and teach them to be able to look at those things, to notice the urges before they come up, and to take proper steps so they don't do those things. But if someone's still dealing with the sexual abuse that took place, or hasn't addressed the loss of their father, or the role reversal parenting, and what it's meant for them, it's going to come out in some other way so often. You know, they may have started off as self-harmer. We've seen so many clients then turn to drug abuse, or turn to eating disorder behaviors, or turn to, let's term promiscuity or other sexually acting out behaviors to compensate because they haven't looked at those core issues that are on the left-hand side. And so when we can do that, that's when we will get to those appropriate and adaptive responses in the presence of those triggers. That's when they can be in balance and aren't just sort of piecing it together or white-knuckling through life. When they can look at and take on those things on the left, then they can reach real balance, which is the ideal goal. That's what we're trying to get people to. The AAP model posits that you must work with the underlying belief systems in order to relieve the symptomology. That's what I've been talking about. And so it's those things that have happened to us, and then what it leads us to believe about the world and about ourselves are really what's fueling so many of the problems. Belief systems come from past experiences that form attachment styles. And that these are the core issues that without due attention will continue to symptomize in a variety of ways. This is exactly what I'm saying. And so what happens is, so based on like my father dying, and I come to believe that there's no one there for me in the world, well then I'm going to have some real attachment problems. What that means for how, you know, what I am in relationships and who I am in relationships and who I attach to is going to be really affected by stuff like that if I don't work through it. And it's those issues that will keep coming out in different ways that may have at first been self-harm, but then end up in drug abuse. There are 4 major attachment styles. There's the secure, the preoccupied, dismissing, and fearful. Secure is the ideal. That's what we're all hoping to get to. That is when you're able to either, you know, through independence and through nurturance, you're in a healthy balance of both and have a healthy balance of both and are able to show a healthy balance of both. Preoccupied, dismissing, and fearful will tend to be a little more out of the balance. Let's look at those. So you'll see on the left-hand side is intimacy, and on the right-hand, on the bottom rather, is independence. In the bottom left corner is when you have the least amount of intimacy and the least amount of independence. Ideally, you're going to have lots of independence, and you're going to have lots of intimacy. That's where we're able to do both. And am I able to show, and this isn't meant to just as sexual intimacy. This is emotional, relational intimacy. I can show parts of myself that aren't always easy. I can show, I can be vulnerable to people and allow people to be vulnerable to me. It's that kind of intimacy. So when you look in the bottom left corner where someone doesn't have a whole lot of independence and doesn't have a whole lot of intimacy, that's where we see that fearful attachment. That's where someone is really fearful of intimacy and socially avoidant. Those are the people that are really in themselves and can't really attach. Now, the easiest example of that is sort of the person that is over in the corner off by themselves, if you will, the person that doesn't reach out to people, sort of the socially awkward person. This can also really manifest in someone who is very, very gregarious and very much outgoing, but no one ever really knows who they are. This can be the homecoming king that everybody, you know, that can always crack a joke and everybody likes to be around, but feels really very lonely inside and doesn't really attach to anybody, and no one gets to know who they really are. You can very easily hide in a crowd and no one gets to know the inside of you. We can see that fearful attachment. It's also worth noting real fast that we pick this up very directly from our parents. Lots of times how our parents attached is how we attach. We learn that through social learning. It's not necessarily a genetic component. We pick it up when we see how our parents attach to each other, and then mostly how their parents attach to them, so how they will attach to the younger version. That's how we all pick it up. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's a blueprint or it has to be that way. That's just how we're set up to, unless we do something about it. Let's look up when someone who has a lot of intimacy. So this is a high level of intimacy, but not enough independence. That's that top left. That's a preoccupied. So that's when they get really stuck in relationships. And so someone when they have, it looks like a superficial experience, or they're way more into somebody than the other person is to them. And they take everything really personally. They fall in love easily. They fall head over heels for every person. They'll pursue people that clearly aren't interested in them, things like that. And so they tend to define themselves through the relationship that they're in. And lots of times they'll sexualize these relationships as well as a way to sort of try to secure someone in, or to show that they care, because that becomes their whole world. Who they are is very codependent with who they're with. Let's look at the bottom right. That is when someone is very independent, perhaps fiercely independent, if you want to call it that. But they have a low level of intimacy, so they're able to be by themselves a lot, but aren't able to get very vulnerable. That's someone who can be very dismissing of intimacy and counter-dependent. And what that means is, I don't need you. I'm okay if you're there. I'm okay if you're not there. It kind of doesn't matter to me. And so how that'll show up is in relationships is, if you're here, great. If you call me, great. I'm probably not going to reach out to you. If you happen to come near me, that's awesome. But when you go away, I'm probably not going to miss you. And then the top right is secure. And that is someone who has a lot of intimacy and someone who has a lot of independence. That's the point to which we're all trying to get. That would be the point of real balance. That's someone who's comfortable with intimacy, with getting vulnerable, and okay being by themselves. And so when someone with whom that matters to them, and someone with whom they're attached, they go away, they miss them, but they can get on by themselves. And when the person is there, they're able to be vulnerable, they're able to show themselves, and they're able to accept vulnerability from another person. It's a very balanced way of approaching and being in life. So Goldstein in 1995, he identified the need to address this parent-child role reversal. And this was the first time that we really, anybody really started looking at what that meant. And so that the kids gained recognition primarily from meeting the needs of an impaired parent, while their own needs for nurturance and safety meant unmet. So when I talked about that role reversal parenting, I really want to emphasize, and I don't want to underplay about what that looks like for someone and what that could mean as far as their attachment style. Because when it goes that way, let me skip back real fast. When we look at if someone is within that and they've had that role reversal parenting, we're going to see someone who isn't going to be okay with intimacy, and then someone who's probably going to be really okay with independence, because they're having to take care of anybody, including themselves. And so they're not going to necessarily attach very well, and they're not going to have a whole lot of places for intimacy. So we may see that fearful attachment style, where they're socially avoidant and they don't reach out to other people. Lots of times that's those really enmeshed parent-child relationships, or very insular. We can only trust our family. We can't trust anybody else. Or we might see someone who's very dismissing, like, I'm okay if you're here, okay if you're not here. I'll take care of the situation, but when you go away, I'm just fine. That's what we're going to see. Let me skip back. Through that, what Goldstein highlighted in that study about when kids gain that recognition, they're learning that their needs aren't important and that the needs of other are important. And so it's going to really end up showing that way. And that's a really big deal. That's going to end up being a lot of these really complex clients that we see, because nurturance ends up taking on a really funky role for them in their life, and what that means and how they look at those things. Dura and others back in 2009 identified the disrupted communication, lack of positive affect involvement, and parental flatness of affect in not childhood trauma, and I'll check that out, as the predictors of major behavioral issues in adults. Now that's a huge deal that Dura found a few years ago. Now this isn't that something inherently horrible happened to them. This isn't necessarily sexual abuse, this isn't physical abuse, this isn't that parents went out of their way to hurt their kids. What happened was they had really flat parents that the kids learned that they can't read, and so they didn't know what to make out of it. And they never learned how to be about how to be high or how to be low or what's appropriate when. And so they didn't have any of that stuff. They had nothing to attach to. Their parents were there, but they weren't there. That became a predictor of major behavioral issues in adults later on in life. Not necessarily that they were physically abused, but they had parents that weren't there emotionally. That's a really big deal. And so for so many of our clients who we can't piece together about what happened, or I can't make sense out of this, and I'm trying to look at those underlying core issues to help them work with that, lots of times it's just, what were your parents like in front of you? How did they attach to you? What did they show you about love and the importance of you as a child in their life? How important did you feel? What was it like around your parents? And so it's really easy to look at clients who yelled and screamed at each other, if there was physical violence, if they saw that, if parents was an alcoholic, it's pretty easy to look at, oh my gosh, look how that probably showed up, and look what effect that's having on our clients' belief systems. But that's not our complex ones. These are the ones who we can't figure out. These are the ones who we can't piece it together. What Dura found is that parental flatness of affect and the lack of positive affect involvement from their parents, which just means their parents didn't show them a whole lot of love, weren't there from a lot. They didn't necessarily get a lot of what they needed. That came up with the major behavioral issues in these really complex clients. That's a really good place to look and a really good place to pin down about, I can't piece together this client. We can look at the attachment and and whether or not what their parents were like in front of them and whether they are able to show affect. The small traumas add up into really big parts of our lives and define who we are and how we relate to the world. So those small things, and so many of our complex clients, there's not the big traumas. They're not the things that can easily look to. They're the little small things that add up to really big parts of their lives. Anecdotally, some of the clients who I just couldn't piece together and couldn't figure out, because there wasn't any of those big things to look at. I couldn't figure out how they got, where the emotional injuries came from. They were these small T's, and so it may have been lots of bullying that came up along the way, maybe not even physical, but name-calling or lack of social attention or not being able to fit in, and then the client became some really strong beliefs about themselves and about the world. Those are the places to look. Those are the rocks to turn over and try to see if there's anything under there to try to help piece together this puzzle of these clients that are keeping us up at night. And I can't tell you how many times I've asked the question about, well, hold on, so tell me about, maybe you didn't get physically bullied, but how did you relate to your peers? What were your friends like, or how often did you see them? What's happening a lot now, what I'm experiencing, especially with our younger clients, is cyberbullying. And so obviously there's nothing physical that takes place there. But what gets said on someone's Facebook or Twitter or on their Instagram, or Reddit, or what happens there, or what somebody says, and then everybody could see, they feel like the laughing stock, and that affects them. That affects, that's sort of the same injury of someone, making fun of someone like in a big cafeteria, and everybody pointing and laughing. That's the internet version of that, and it has the same exact emotional effect. They still feel horribly embarrassed, have trouble going to school the next day, feel so just completely shameful based on what didn't get said about them but got typed about them. And then the next day in school becomes really tough. That obviously cyberbullying is very much on the rise and very, very difficult to deal with, and affects our clients in some major, major ways. It happens with adults. It absolutely does. There's some very mean things that get said out there. It's just my own experiences. It just tends to happen with the younger, just because they're on those social media so much more. So let's look at treatment planning. So if we're looking at with our complex clients, like, okay, what are the core issues? What's going on? We've got maybe big T's. If they're complex and we can't piece it together, then probably some small T's and some things that aren't inherently in our face about what's operating that way. Okay, so those are the targets for intervention. Great, got it. That's the target. Now, how do I target it? That's where treatment planning comes in. That's where we're going next. So in the beginning, as far as treatment planning, of course, one of the first things you're going to do is history taking. You're going to ask questions related to attachment and early experiences, and then ask about how they attach today. Lots of our forms get dictated to us. There's licensure standards, there's state standards, there's even within your own agency standards. And those questions may or may not be on there. It doesn't always fit in with what it has to be plugged in to meet all these different requirements. But we can still ask those questions. There's easy, natural jumping off points about, where did you grow up? Where are you from? Talk to me about how your parents showed caring for you. Talk to me about how your parents showed affect. Was anybody really flat? Was anybody really not around? What was that like for you? You'll get some real insight into if there was some of that real flat affect that Dura found back in that study back in 2009 that can really predict some problems. And then ask about how they attach today. What's it like for you with other people? How do you show yourself to other people? How do you make yourself vulnerable? You'll get a good read on that, because those will go together. If it's a complex client and they're in our office or wherever they are, and we're trying to look at this and piece this together, probably there's still some attachment issues. Probably the way they were taught to attach, growing up is still the way they attach today, which is probably dysfunctional. And again, everyone's responsible for their own actions, but they did just pick this up. This is just how they were shown about how to attach to people. This is just what their parents showed them about the way the world works and operates. It's kind of not their fault. They just got shown these things, and they're doing the best they can given the resources that they have. This is the resources that they have. That's why they have us, so we'll be able to help show them some other resources, help move them along. But ask these questions. Really get into that part of attachment and those early experiences, not just around the big traumas, but the little traumas too. The second part, so after we've got the good history and we've really looked at, that's also the place, by the way, that you're going to do some hypothesis about what's going on. There's every chance you're going to be wrong, but you're going to start trying to piece together about this case and what makes sense and why. From there, the next part has to do with preparation and psychoeducation. I'm a big believer in teaching clients about their diagnoses and symptomology about what's going on. So here at Rosewood, we have a lot of eating disorder clients, obviously. We do the psychoeducation about their eating disorder. We go through very much about what's in the DSM. So if someone has an anorexia diagnosis, here's what that means, and here's what all goes into that, and here's what we know that comes from. There's a genetic component, there's a social component, there's a learning component, there's a current trigger component. Here's what all those things mean. Now, of course, there's a risk. I'm going to recognize that there's a risk, because then some clients, of course, are going to argue back and say, what are you talking about? I don't have all of those. I don't meet that criteria. That's not me. That's probably true. Got it. What that does allow for, though, and this is a little trick, is in that conversation when I'm talking about, okay, here's what the definition of anorexia is. You have this diagnosis. Here's what we're looking at. When that client's saying, well, I don't have all those, got it. Well, what do you have? What does make sense here? Which of these symptoms is showing up for you? Which one of these are you battling right now? Oh, well, I do have this one, and I do have that one. Great. We've just gotten them to admit they're having troubles. We've just gotten them to admit that there are these problems that are going on for them. Great. Foot's in the door. I got an edge. I'm having them admit that there's something going on that they need to work on. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted to do there. So there's two purposes in teaching someone and just doing the basic psychoeducation about diagnoses and symptoms. I'm giving them the information because everybody should have that. That's in their file. That's going to be with them. Diagnoses aren't things to lightly throw around, especially if someone's getting like a, on an access to, and they're getting a personality disorder. That stuff sticks, and it's really easy to label clients that way. And the next clinician picking those things up or looking at all that, that's in there, and that shouldn't be taken lightly. And so they should know what's going on that way and what all those things mean. I really believe that. Just arming them with information, and then also you're getting, in a very backdoor kind of a way, agreement that there's problems going on. Because if I'm explaining to an anorexic, like, hey, here's all the symptoms, here's what it goes on to be an anorexic, and they go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I've just gotten them to agree that they have a problem. Or if they're arguing with me, but they'll admit to one or two of those, I've still gotten them to admit what's going on. We have a jumping off point. We have a place to go. We have a place to work with. Also, in the preparation part, we're going to teach and rehearse self-control techniques. This is really key in the beginning. We're going to teach breathing exercises. We're going to do things like progressive muscle relaxation, or we're going to do biofeedback. There's a lot of really great breathing exercises that are out there, and lots of them work. Some of them work great for some clients. Some of them don't work great. I have 5 or 6 of these that I try out with just about everybody. Everybody can end up relating to 1 or 2 of them. Awesome. You now have 1 or 2 things in your toolbox that you can use when you need it. The progressive muscle relaxation is one of those things that people can use to help release tension or stress or anxiety whenever that's going on. It's really easy to do. You can do it in the car, and in a moment you can tighten muscles and release them, and tighten muscles and release them, or when stuff's going on at your desk at work, or it's just so easy to use every place, and people won't even necessarily notice it. When you're in a meeting and something's going on for you, you can do progressive muscle relaxation, and no one around you will necessarily know, and then it has a great effect. And then biofeedback. We're seeing lots of really good research trending into the importance of this and how much it can affect clients. And that is so much has to do with matching up things like breathing and heart rate and being able to kick in your parasympathetic nervous system when you need to so you can calm yourself down in different ways. There's lots of computer programs out there. There are lots of video game type things that can be used. There are lots of things that you can buy that show you about as far as like how your breathing is matching up and being able to lower your heart rate. There's things that clip onto your ears that can completely show about things like alpha waves and how they are affecting you. I don't want to totally go down that rabbit hole and get all that information, but here's what I know for sure is that biofeedback is absolutely helpful, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. When I link clients up with it and those resources, they're very thankful, and those absolutely positively help in some major ways and some long term. So after history taking and preparation and psychoeducation, the next part is you're going to teach them about the treatment process and the importance of looking at the childhood issues. So we're going to explain to them, okay, here's what treatment's going to look like for you overall. Here we're going to look at what's showing up right now, about those symptoms, about the triggers, about what's going on that way. If you have an eating disorder, what that means for you as far as like anorexia or bulimia or binge eating or whatever, eating disorder not otherwise specified that's in front of you, we're going to talk about what that treatment process looks like, how long it could potentially take, the order we're going to try to address things, and then we're absolutely at this point going to talk about we need to look at those underlying issues. It may be the big T's, like we talked about, like sexual abuse or physical abuse or neglect or something like that, or it may be those small traumas. And so if during our history-taking part, they talked about how there was some role reversal parenting, and what that meant that they had to completely compensate for their parents and make up for all those things. We're going to explain we need to look at that because that influences how you look at the world and what you make out of relationships, and then how you attach. And that means something for you right now. And for the symptomology that we're seeing, we're going to address it right now so they know it's a big deal. And then we're also going to rehearse how to handle these. As far as I'm concerned, I can teach all these great skills. Let me skip back one, where we have like those breathing exercises and the progressive muscle relaxation, or maybe even the biofeedback. I'm going to teach those to you in session. Let me skip forward again. In sessions, we are going to role play using those, because so much has to do with I can teach you how to use something. I can teach you a skill. But in a moment when you have adrenaline kicking up because you're scared, or because you're in the middle of an urge and something's hard to deal with, we know that you're not necessarily accessing that information in the way that we would like you to. That stuff is kind of stored in a whole different part of your brain, and once adrenaline comes up and you're scared, you may not be able to access those. So we're going to role play that. We're going to role play that. Maybe it's in group, maybe it's an individual session, but we're going to go through about, I'm going to have you walk through an imaginable situation where you're getting triggered. Tell me about a time in the past week where something really aggravated you. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 5 or a 6. Great. Now walk me through that. Imagine that scene. Really look at it. Tell me what you're seeing in your mind's eye. What's the part that's really aggravating you? What's the part that's really bringing up the anger in you right now? Great. Do you feel the anger for you going on right at this moment? Very good. Where do you notice that in your body? Okay, great. And so I'm going to try to get them to up it and then really notice that emotion. Awesome. So you're feeling that anger. You can see that scene. Show me how to use one of your deep breathing techniques right now. And then in session, I'm going to watch them de-escalate themselves with one of those tools they put in the toolbox, one of the breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, and decrease that anger that they're experiencing. Because if they can do it in front of me, and they can go through an imaginal situation that took place, and they can go from a 5 or 6 on an anger scale down to a 1 or 2 in my office, through doing that, I'm going to be more likely to believe they can do it whenever it gets kicked up, whenever they're actually aggravated, whenever a trigger in real life hits them. As much as possible, I'm going to have them doing those things, because if they can show me the skill that I've taught them, then they're going to be able to use it. After that, I'm going to have them track the times when they effectively use those skills. There's going to be some journaling. And I just want them not to track the times when they're triggered. I want them to track the times that they were triggered and handled it appropriately. Because I want to constantly reinforce things whenever they're handling things well. I want them to go back at and look at and talk to me about all the times when they handled something that was difficult in just the way they want to handle it, because then we get to talk about it, and I get to tell them great job, and I get to tell them, wow, that must have been really hard, but you handled that so great. Look how far you've come. Between the rehearsal that's going to go on in the office or in group, and then charting the times that occur in vivo in real life, really going to lock in their ability to handle those situations, for them to use the tools that we've taught them. Now, and this is done very much in this order, because unfortunately, for lots of different reasons, clients drop out at treatment. Sometimes it's for money issues or insurance issues, or they move, or their parents decide that they can't be in treatment anymore, or their car breaks down, or they just leave for no good reason. That happens, you know. But if nothing else, at this point, if they don't come back, then what I have taught them is about their disorder, about what goes on, about how treatment could and should go, about the importance of looking at the underlying issues in their life and what that means for them. And then we've taught and rehearsed how to handle difficult situations. If that's all they get from me, if they bolt after that session and never come back, they're better off. They're able to handle more things in life. Now, we haven't gotten to the core issues, and we haven't addressed, and treatment certainly isn't over. But this treatment planning is set up this way to allow them to take on these things, to put the earliest things first. That if that's all they get, they're better off. From there, and if they're able to pull all the things off, and we're able to keep going, then we're going to start looking at the deeper targets. We're going to start looking at the times when they learned those quote-unquote difficult lessons from their parents. That may be like the times when, dad said, you got to be a man and you can't show emotions, or had told their really sensitive daughter it's not okay to cry, or whenever, the kid came home and then said, Mom, I'm so sad, and that very flat affected parent didn't respond at all. Maybe they just walked away. Maybe they didn't do anything. That's the one we're going to start looking at, those sort of what they've learned about the world, or learned about from parents, and learned about attachment at these times. These are the times when they are having to parent their parents or their siblings. That's that role reversal parenting. Times when they learned how not to communicate. And so many times parents are teaching what to do, and parents are also teaching what not to do. And so they may, in those situations, learn to avoid communication, to avoid vulnerability, to avoid about not dealing with situations. That's exactly about how not to do things. Times when they saw flatness from their parents, or times of perceived aloneness and misattunement. So that's whenever they feel completely disconnected from their family or their friends, completely alone, or like their parents, like we're saying, it's okay to be angry, but never get angry. Or their parents are showing one thing, but aren't doing the other. Like everything is okay and happy on the outside, but clearly they're really very depressed. Or like they're drinking a lot, but telling them that things are fine. It's that misattunement is they're showing one thing but saying a whole other, which for a kid is a very, very confusing message. Abusive memories might come up, and they might be in there. At this point, and this is called pruning, so when the abusive stuff comes up, and so if they have big T's and small T's, at this point we're looking at those little T's. The big traumas, the abusive stuff might come up. At this point, all we want to do is acknowledge those and assure them that they're going to be processed later. And then, of course, make sure that you do. The goal here is to keep the goal. We're focusing on the small stuff. And so in the midst of looking at that parental affect or the role reversal parenting or those sort of instances when the misattunement or how not to communicate, if in the midst of that I'm discussing it or however I'm processing it with my client, and then they start discussing about how, their dad used to beat them, or, they saw, mom hitting dad, or, whatever the big things are, those are important. We're going to acknowledge the importance, acknowledge what a big deal they are, acknowledge how hard that stuff is and how it must have affected them, and we're going to get to that stuff, but just not right now. Let's focus back on those times when you went to your mom, but she didn't show you how to attach. She showed you how to sort of turn off the emotions and make everything look okay from the outside. We'll get to those abusive memories, just not right yet. And then, of course, make sure that stuff is on the treatment plan. Also, it's worth noting that in processing The smaller T's, the clients may have been holding on to and may have just not disclosed the bigger traumas. We see that all the time, and that's very much associated with the shame that goes with those horrible, terrible, awful things happening. And it may not be that they're, just wanting to lie or being deceptive for the sake of being deceptive, anything like that. It's just really hard to admit those things. And there's a whole lot of shame. And one of the things that clients and victims so typically do is blame themselves. So if they're in the midst of blaming themselves, and it's an awful thing to admit to, and there's lots of shame, their intent may not be deception. Their intent may just be, I can't admit it at this point. And saying it out loud makes it feel more real. That stuff comes up a lot in processing the smaller T's. When you're able to look at the flat affective parent, they're a little more willing, because you have rapport, and they're able to feel a little more confident about their ability to handle that stuff, and it may just came up at this point. There's also those really rare instances where people spontaneously remember things that have been repressed. That doesn't happen that much. It can. It absolutely can. I have to respect the fact that those things can take place. It's just not very typical. Obviously, when new memories come up or when they disclose new things, do your diligence around reporting, on making sure all those things are taken care of. And let them know that they're really, really important. And empathize with them. And do whatever you need to in those moments. And make sure you stay on target. Because with complex clients, lots of times we might get distracted for what's coming up and, oh my gosh, there's a huge trauma, let's process that. Maybe not. In these situations, you're going to want to stay with those flat affect, the misattunement, the role reversal parenting. Once those little T's have been adequately processed and the client can clearly tolerate looking at those memories without symptomizing, and what symptomizing is, whatever is going on. If they're cutters, that means they're not cutting, they're not binging and purging, they're not being promiscuous, whatever that looks like, then we're going to really push them into the experiences that challenge those underlying belief systems that are really a core part of the way they attach. And we're going to readdress as necessary. We're going to stay on those things until they're not as disturbing as they once were. There are a lot of different ways to look at trauma, and I'm not going to say which one of those to do. That is very, very, that's going to be very therapist specific. The AAP model, obviously, is, as I said, is very much linked to EMDR. I think EMDR is great. There's lots of great research around it. Trauma-focused CBT for adolescents is really very good. It gets great results. The research is clear on that. Stress inoculation training, really very good. A great way to look at things. Stuff around thought field therapy, or a lot of the movement therapies, or Gestalt techniques. There's lots of therapists that do lots of really great work in working with trauma with each of those. I'm not going to prescribe which way. I'm not going to take a stance on that because I know everybody has something that works for them. What I'm trying to accomplish here today is whatever you do, whatever it is you do, as far as looking at the trauma, just make sure you're staying there until it's not as disturbing as it once was. We have to be able to look at those underlying symptoms with our complex clients, because if not, just like we're saying, it's going to come out again in a different way. That's what makes them so complex. As we've processed these small T's, as we've gotten through all that stuff, then we can get to those big abusive traumas. Those are the stuff that we've pruned, the stuff that we've said, okay, listen, we understand, those are big things. That really stinks. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Let's stay looking at that role reversal parenting. Okay, let's look at these other things if we need to. And then you process it that way too. Another big part, and I got to recognize as far as what makes complex clients so complex or so difficult, or when they're just not making the progress that we would like we would like them to see, is we have to look at our own stuff. And so if we've done great history taking and great education and great teaching of tools and able to use all those tool bags and all these things, we also need to ask the question about our own stuff and about what's going on that way, because complex clients can absolutely burn us out. Complex clients are the ones that, if they're keeping you up at night, or you're asking so much and you're using up so much of your mental and maybe even physical energy, that makes it hard. Very few of us are going to get to have a caseload of one and get to spend all the time just looking at that really very difficult client. We probably have lots of other clients, and maybe we have several complex clients going on at the same time. I also know that lots of us are terrible at self-care, and if we don't do those things, then we're going to burn out in looking at these really complex cases. So I want to spend some time with this. I want to spend looking at the importance of that, because if we don't do these things, no matter how good we are at history taking and working with trauma and doing education, if we end up burnt out from all this vicarious trauma and from working with complex clients, no matter how good we are at those parts, we're not going to serve our clients well. We're going to watch them flounder and not be the way that they need to be. So our own stuff. So vicarious trauma is a result of opening up your heart and mind to the worst in human experience. That's what we get all the time in working with so many of our clients. We get the description of what hell might look like, of what goes on. Sometimes horrible, terrible, awful things happening to little kids that they shouldn't ever know about, and you have to wonder about why it even exists in the world. And vicarious trauma means that you can come to question your deepest beliefs about the way life and that the universe work, and the existence and nature of meaning and hope. What's being said there is, it's one thing to have a really tough case and to go out and handle that, and to talk to your spouse, your boyfriend or girlfriend or whomever about it, or to talk to your peers, or to get clinical supervision about it. But vicarious trauma means that you start really looking about perhaps even your spiritual beliefs and whether or not the world's an okay place, and you really start looking at what the world is made up of. And I've seen so many great therapists just in front of rough story after rough story about rough story about what they start to think about people, and about whether or not people are good, and whether or not the world's an okay, good place. When that's going on, that's vicarious trauma. That means you're getting hit really very hard, and you're not in a balanced place in your life. And it comes easily when we're in front of, and what we're in front of, counselors and therapists and dietitians and psychiatrists and doctors, and we are in front of so many bad life stories and circumstance. It's easy to take this on and to feel it in deep ways, but that's not beneficial to us. That's what leads to these things that no matter how good you are, eventually you end up not good at your job. The factors that influence susceptibility to vicarious trauma. So we have our own individual factors, and that's just who we are, like what our personality is, how we tend to view the world, just kind of who we are and how we tend to believe things and how we tend to operate. So if you're someone that's a little high-strung, super type A, that's going to be one set of individual factors, versus someone if you're a little more laid back or type B, or things roll off your back a little bit easier. That's going to be a big part of the individual factors. Overlapping with that is the life situation factors. That's our life outside of work. That's what goes on as far as like what my relationship is like with my wife, or what's going on with my kids, or my parents, or having trouble meeting the mortgage, or got in a car wreck, or just had one of my peers quit and I'm having to take that stuff on. Things like that aren't necessarily about me. That's just what's happening to me in life. And those things, when you combine them with individual factors, can really set up about susceptibility to vicarious trauma. There's also a big part, and if the organizational and / cultural factors, I have them listed here at the bottom, but it's a big overarching thing. How your organization looks at and deals with how rough things are. And so if you're in an organization that has lots of really difficult, tough, complex clients, and so many of you end up dealing with a lot of trauma and people acting out and those sort of things, whether or not you have a supervisor that is able to talk to you about that stuff, or support you, or say, listen, you had a rough day, head home, or if your caseload is too high because of budget cuts that have taken place, things like that, those are big time factors. That's the culture within your organization, that those things can absolutely manifest. So even if you have those individual factors where maybe you're a little high strung, or you tend to take things personally, or you're easily, you easily take on emotions that way, and you have a lot going on in your life. But if you have an organization that values being able to talk about these things, and in your clinical supervision you can talk about what's going on for you, that'll totally help. That absolutely helps take away a lot of, like the heat or the pressure to these situations, and that makes it less likely to lead to the vicarious trauma. If you have an organization that isn't that way, though, and lots of times through nobody's fault or direct intent, it sort of just goes that way. Everybody gets overwhelmed, everybody's trying to take on too much, then it becomes a whole lot easier for vicarious trauma to set in. Vicarious trauma, when it's with us, when we're taking on, when our belief systems about people and therefore our clients and the world are being affected, it's impossible. We can't get through all the things we need to get through. Every client then sort of takes on this as super complex, they're super difficult, everyone is so hard. Every new client becomes the toughest client we've ever seen, and they manifest in these new ways. That's probably not true. That's probably not the way the trend is. That's probably not what actually is taking place. That's probably your own stuff that's going on there. When in front of clients, we're thinking that relapse seems absolutely inevitable. Like they're here for now, but they're never going to make it. They're never going to be able to do it. It's just going to happen no matter what. And we got to note that clients can only get as far as our expectations will allow. If I'm in front of a client and I'm thinking that, like, listen, this is the most complex and difficult client that I've seen, and they're going to relapse no matter what I do, how are they going to overcome what their therapist's expectations are? They're going to make it the balance in spite of the person that's helping them? Probably not. Probably not. Probably our expectations are going to influence how far they can get. If we expect that they can get into balance, if we expect the absolute world from them, if we see in them their ability to do it despite difficult circumstances, then they have a chance. If we're thinking that they're never going to make it, man, we're really cutting off their chances. We're really influencing their ability to do it. I'm not saying that clients can't do it, but that would mean then your client is overcoming you, and that's not what your role there. In those roles, we're agents of change. We're supposed to be purveyors of hope. And in this case, we're instilling that relapse is going to happen and that we're carrying with them in that session. It makes it really hard for people to move forward. And that's just going to add even more into your vicarious trauma. As you get more and more examples of clients who just can't make it, clients who just keep relapsing, who are more difficult and more complex than anything else I've seen, you're reinforcing that belief system that's just going to become entrenched, maybe too entrenched. Here's what we went over. Here's where we've been. We've been understanding the obstacles and looking at those as the key to success. We went through that the adaptive information model dictates that we have to look at the underlying memories that help to form us. So we have to look at those early things, whether it's the big T's or the small T's, and what that means for us. We also have to look at attachment styles and how they form and what that means for us now and how we'll relate to others. Proper treatment planning can absolutely lead to success, and that our own stuff can be as big as their stuff. And that's a big statement. I realize that one is a big statement, but I've seen it so many times where therapists get in the way of their clients. And so we have to constantly be people who are looking at ourselves and analyzing where we are and how we're viewing ourselves and potentially sort of even viewing the world about whether we're balanced or whether we're okay in life. Those were our goals in the beginning, and that's what we've gone through. There's me, Michael Klingner, MSW-LCSW. That's the phone number I can be reached at, and that's also the email in case anybody wants to email questions or any thoughts or comments along the way.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We appreciate your time today. And for those of you that have joined us today, we want to thank you. Again, you can forward any questions you have to Michael at the email address you see on the screen as well. I'm going to put up the instructions you need to get your CEs. Immediately following the webinar, we will send you an email with an evaluation and a post-test attached. We need you to complete both forms and return to the email address you see on the screen, tri@rosewoodranch.com. Upon successful completion, that means a score of 80% or better, and receipt of the post-test and evaluation, a CE certificate will be emailed to you. Also, if you have any additional questions, if you'd like a copy of the slides, please email tri@rosewoodranch.com, And for additional information, you can visit us at the www.rosewoodinstitute.org, where we have more on-demand webinars for your training. We appreciate your time. We know that you're extremely busy, so thank you for joining us today.